Hey everyone, thank you for joining me on the Story Builder podcast. I am thrilled to be with author Brandon McNulty. Brandon, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
You bet. Brandon, you grew up loving monsters, demons, and the thrill of a great scare. You write suspense, horror, and other dark fiction. Some of your novels include Bad Parts, Entry Wounds, and The Half Murders. And most recently, you put out a book called Story Made Simple. Again, so thrilled to chat with you. Now, Brandon, you obviously love story. Can you share with me a few of your favorite stories that just got you into this? Like, wow, I want to be a writer. I want to tell my own stories.
Wow. So, I mean, going back to childhood, I think the Goosebumps books were big with me, especially like I remember being like 8 years old in second grade, and I would be, getting my work done in class as fast as I possibly could, so that I'd have time to read like The Haunted Mask or Monster Blood or any of those heavy hitters from the time period. But um, The Haunted Mask was my favorite Goosebumps book as a kid. And it was about a little girl. She gets bullied at school, and she wants to scare away the bullies. And she goes to this little shop by her house. And at the shop, they have this terrifying mask, and she wants it. And the shopkeeper gives it to her. She puts it on her head, and it gets stuck to her head. She can't get it off. And she ends up becoming terrifying. She scares away all the bullies, but she has to figure out a way to get it off. And that had been one that has stuck with me ever since I was a kid. And when I wrote my second book, Entry Wounds, it's about a haunted gun.
Mm-hmm.
When you pick it up, you can't put it down till you kill 6 people with it. And the whole concept of having a gun stuck to your hand came from The Haunted Mask. So, I think as far as like the earliest stories that influenced me, that was definitely a big one. And then, as I got older, I would read, more, adult oriented stories like Stephen King's novel Salem's Lot, which,
Okay.
was I read it like my first year of college. And at that point in my life, I was trying to figure out like, oh, what do I want to do? Because I started as pre-med and I was like, I don't really like this. I was crushing the classes, but I just was so miserable. And I'm like, oh, I want to find something that I actually, get excited to start doing. And, next thing you know, I'm reading Stephen King books on the side, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Like Salem's Lot. It gripped me. I was up till like 2 a.m, night after night, trying to finish it. Cause I'm like the slowest reader on the planet. I don't know about you, Jim, but like,
I am too.
I,
I appreciate that.
yeah,
I am slow.
I guess, I don't know if it's just because like we're writers and we think about like the craft and everything that's going on the page, but with me, like it takes me forever to get through any book at all. And it helps though if I'm enjoying it. It speeds up the process a little bit. But Salem's Lot, I remember just absolutely, it was something that I got to look forward to every day for like a week after I was done with my homework or whatever it was. And that ended up being a big inspiration for Bad Parts, which was my first book, because first book was like a small town horror novel, and like all those, Stephen King small town horror ones, whether it was, Salem's Lot or Pet Cemetery or Needful Things, those ones I just absolutely loved.
That is so interesting how you're kind of connecting the dots. Looking back, you're like, oh, this is inspired by this story. This was inspired by that story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most writers actually do that, but I think most writers don't admit it. I think
or they're not conscious of it. Yeah,
that's fair. I think it maybe they don't. Yeah, they're not aware of it, and it's like it's so just it's like it's just baked in. And obviously, the more stories you consume, the more it kind of gets mixed together. But I really love that because it's such an interesting thing where you can kind of just be like, oh yeah, connect the dots. Here you go. And I think a lot of stories, it's just refreshing to kind of have a simple approach versus, I don't think people, like as a writer, I know I don't want to do a really complex story. I'm not saying don't, like, especially in early stages, but I mean, even the most complicated stories like Pulp Fiction, it's like 3 short stories just mixed up.
Yeah,
And,
well, I think one thing, just real quick, I want to point out, like, I think there's a difference between complex and complicated. I think when we talk about something that's complex, I think that's where you're taking a bunch of simple ideas and you're combining them in a way that, just lights the spark, brings the story to life. And
Uh-huh.
I think when we talk about complicated, I think we're talking about bringing too many ideas or too many like messy ideas together. And then that's where audiences lose track of what's going on and they get bored. And then that becomes a problem.
Complicated almost just being a negative connotation
Yeah.
because complex is okay as long as it has some clarity.
Mhm.
It's when you get that hodgepodge messy situation that people just don't care. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a creator, as a storyteller. It's like, don't let the audience get bored. Don't confuse them in a way that makes them feel dumb. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, I don't think you guys know the answer that are writing it. Have
Mhm.
you ever done that? You're watching a show or reading a book and you're like, I can tell you're making this up as you go and you have no
Mhm.
idea,
Absolutely. And
right?
then the sad thing is, I mean, I do that myself when I'm writing. I'm just making things up as I go. But I mean, like that's the whole point of the editing process. I mean, it's great to make things up as
Smooth
you
it
go.
out.
Sometimes that leads to a fun little detour where you get some exciting scenes or an event you never anticipated. But you got to clean things up afterwards, and you got to make sure everything's set up properly and all
Right.
that
I
good
think that
stuff.
comes down to plotting and structure and, making things fit.
And just recognizing what makes a good story, recognizing what a story needs in order to be successful. And I think if you are gonna take those risks and get wild with the direction you take your story, you can make that work, but you just have to set it up properly and manage the audience's expectations.
This is a general question, but do you think genre is something that really is so key when coming up with a story? Because for me, it's like if you just lean on genre, almost all the answers are there. Versus, if you ignore genre, and I know some folks kind of mix genres together because you
Of
have
course.
some that would be a supernatural thriller, right?
Mhm.
But if you just lean on genre, usually it's like, look, the template's pretty much there within reason. You don't have to try to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like genre, you're always thinking about tropes and
Yeah,
what do we expect in a certain type of story? What do we expect, out of a horror story versus a romance or whatever it is? And I think one thing that we're seeing a lot of in recent years is mashing together different genres in order to get something fresh and original. And I think that's a great thing because if we are reading like a straight up horror story, we're going to have a specific set of expectations for how it's going to play out. And, I think with a lot of classic horror stories, we know, okay, well, you're going to have this character, they're going to have to face their fears, and then,
mhm,
they're going to encounter that fear, and then that there's going to be some kind of standoff between the character and whatever it is they fear, and then they're either going to overcome it or succumb to it. And that can get kind of predictable unless it's done in a fresh way. So that's where sometimes we want to involve other genres, whether it's bringing in supernatural elements, and supernatural would be like fantasy. So something from like another world, that changes, you know, that changes how we play with the expectations. And I think that's what ultimately genre is all about, expectations. And it's our job to figure out how we're going to use those to tell new stories.
do you notice in your writing just recurring themes, tropes, even ideas that you're like, wow, I really like this one. I just kind of keep coming back to this trope or theme or whatever. Just like stuff that just keeps popping up in your stories. Do you ever notice that on your work?
I'm always writing. I think what usually grabs me when I write a story is some element of the supernatural.
Okay.
I feel like I'm cheating if I don't use the supernatural at some point. Like it's just like I mean I would love to write like just a straight up horror story set in reality where maybe you just have like a killer who's just a psychopath whatever coming
Yeah.
after the main character. But for me, I always gravitate toward that element of the unknown or that element of magic where it's like, okay, we have a horror story, but where's this going to go now that we have some kind of like supernatural twist to it? And that
Right.
that for me has always been like the thing that grabs me. How do I and usually here's the thing, I don't necessarily think about what the supernatural element means.
Mm.
on like a thematic level. That's usually something I discover after the first draft when, I send it out to some people and they point out things to me and I'm like, oh, I get what you're saying there. It was interesting because when I wrote Entry Wounds, the book about the
Mhm.
haunted gun,
Great.
there was a situation where I wrote it and I just, thought of it just like, okay, well, this character picks up a haunted gun and now he's got to figure out how he's going to kill 6 people with it. And, how is he going to get through all that? And after I had written the first draft and I sent it off to a buddy of mine, he pointed out to me that one of the themes that was like really central to it was that characters were trapped. You have this one character, the gun is essentially trapping him in this new scenario where, he has to kill people. And then there was his brother who was, trapped in heroin addiction. And then his father was trapped in a wheelchair. And there was another character who was trapped in another deadly situation. And all the characters, and I didn't even realize this while I was writing it, but they all had something that was kind of anchoring them to a situation where, they wanted to break free of. And that book was ultimately about characters, trying to, break free of whatever it was, whether it was the gun, whether it was addiction, whether it was, health issues, whatever it could be.
That makes a lot of sense. Like the desperation, the intensity of it. That makes a lot of sense. How it would just be natural for you. Like you're not gonna have a boring situation with that premise. It's not like it wouldn't set up. It wouldn't pass the the smell test for you. I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's another thing with those supernatural concepts that I work with. I always want to give myself something that, I have a lot to explore in terms of the mystery of it. Because then, if there's mystery, then the audience isn't going to get bored. Whenever there's mystery, that breeds curiosity. The audience has to know what's going to happen next. And then all of a sudden, okay, they're 50 pages deep into the story and they're invested.
There's something about the hooks in a mystery that just that's that keeping the audience turning the pages. And I think that's a challenge. I mean, for me personally, it's like you want to have hooks ideally at the end of every chapter.
Yeah.
And I keep kind of reminding myself, especially in editing and things, it's like my editor would sometimes be like, there's no hook at all. This is like you just ended the chapter. And I'm like, oops, that's not. No, you want some kind of hook. And obviously you can always introduce something new that's on the horizon leading just to the next chapter. I feel like that's like one of those things that writers really struggle with. And if there's not, frankly, in my mind, several hooks, and I know you're really deep on like, hey, not just stuff happening as far as plot goes. You want characters that you like, that you can relate to, that have some depth. That adds a lot more to it. It's just so much more nuanced when you have characters that you care about versus bang bang explosions, chaos, whatever. That's kind of more of a Michael Bay movie, frankly, right? Where it's just bright and shiny and stuff's happening, but the characters, you have to like them at least on some level or find them interesting enough to like, hey, I'm going to spend some time with you.
And you know what? The thing is, when we're writing books, we don't have that advantage that Michael Bay has, where it could be all those explosions across the screen, and that can distract us for a little bit.
Right, bright and shiny, all that.
When you are writing a book, you do have to get the audience invested in the characters, because that's where it comes from. Like the advantage of writing a novel versus having a movie, a TV show, video game, whatever, is that with the novel, you can really get into the character's perspective, the introspection, all the things that are going on inside their head, and what they're feeling within their skin and everything like that. And that's the difference between the different mediums I just mentioned. But I thought it was interesting you brought up the idea of oh man, now my mind just blipped on.
You're great.
It was something. Yeah, it was like I was like, oh yeah, I got to bring that up, but. No, I think you brought up the idea of those cliffhangers at the end of every chapter. And a buddy of mine, the same guy who told me about, what was going on with Entry Wounds on the thematic
being
level.
Trapped. Yeah.
Yeah. When I wrote my third book, The Half Murders, and I sent it to him, he nailed me for having too many like harsh cliffhangers, like harsh being like dramatic,
really harsh.
like like it was like he's like, I like this book, but every chapter ends on this cliffhanger that's like dun dun dun, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cue the
like
music.
the dramatic cliffhanger. And he's like,
Right.
you got to dial that back. You know, you got to vary up your
Oh, it could
cliffhangers. And
be someone knocking on the door.
Yeah,
That's plenty. It doesn't have to be, the sound of bullets going off. It could be
yeah.
just knock on the door. And I guess it doesn't matter necessarily as long as something's there. It doesn't have to
Yeah,
be as intense, though.
and it
Yeah.
could just be a hint, like you know, you show a look on a strange look on a character's face that just kind of hints that something's going to happen down the line, as opposed to everything being like this dramatic, oh, life and death kind of situation. So I mean, that's the thing with those cliffhangers. I think, yeah, you want to have them at the end of every chapter because you want to invite the reader to continue reading, but you also have to vary them up and be smart about, you know, how you're pacing the story and how you're introducing different elements of the story, or how you're introducing different aspects of the characters.
Now, with your YouTube channel, which I'll be sure to link to because you have amazing, super insightful writing videos, and I've
Thank you.
watched many of them, and there's always something to learn there. You don't really mention that many books. You're very movie focused, and you're chuckling already. You know where I'm going with this. I'll let you
Yeah,
talk.
yeah. So, you know, the one thing I swear every week somebody will reach out to me in the comments section and they'll be like, how come you never talk about books? You never talk about books. And, you know, I understand, like, yeah, they want to hear more about books. They want to see, like, you know, on screen, you know, breakdowns of how different paragraphs work and things like that. But, you know, it's tricky because YouTube is a visual medium. And like when you have something visual, uh, audiences aren't going to be as excited about just text being thrown up on screen as opposed to like if you had clips from like a Batman movie or something like that.
Plus, it's hard
And
to
like,
read that text if you
yeah,
even do, like, if you're on your phone, right?
yeah. And the thing is, I have done some videos. Last year, I did a video that broke down like the opening pages of some popular books, like Game of Thrones and like a Stephen King book, and there were a couple others. And you know, a lot of people appreciated it, but like not a whole lot of people. So it was like, you know, this didn't really work. So, you know, it's one of those risks. You know, I take a lot of risks with the channel. Like I'll do some crowd pleaser videos like my bad versus good dialogue and stuff like that. But I also like to, you know, take some risk on different ideas I have, see what works, see what doesn't. And, you know, unfortunately, like whenever I do books or whenever I do videos on books or like
Mhm.
writing novels and things like that, you know, they don't always take off. And it's just, you know, it's something like, yeah, hey, I would love to discuss this, but you know, if people are getting or are finding like the more visual mediums more helpful, then I'm just going to stick with that.
Makes
And I think,
sense.
yeah, and I think another thing with movies, it's a lot easier to see a movie, and it's a lot
Yeah,
more likely that you have seen a movie as opposed to having
it's
read a book.
common thread. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing, you know, it's interesting because I remember years ago I was reading a book by Donald Moss. He has some great books on writing. The Fire and Fiction, The
Mm.
Emotional Craft of Writing, and then
Yep, I have that one. Yeah.
writing the breakout novel. The Emotional Craft of Fiction is fantastic, and
Mhm.
Fire and Fiction is very underrated. And but the one thing that always drives me crazy about his whenever I'm reading one of his books is he will often like he'll introduce like a subject or something like that, and then he'll turn to some examples, and he's always giving book examples, but he has to explain them, you know, like what they're about and everything, because the reality is most of us aren't going to
Context.
read, aren't,
Right.
yeah, we
Right.
need that context. And then he takes like a page, you know, explaining like just what the book is about
Yeah.
before he dives into it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, you know, like I just want to get more into like the meat of like what we're learning here. But I think like
Right.
for me, like I talk about Star Wars a lot, and like it's because like most people are familiar with what Star Wars is. I don't have to say like, oh, hey,
Right.
it's about this guy named Luke and blah blah blah,
Right.
and then he has to do like most people know what's going on there. So I think it's just a great way to save time because you know with me, I
No,
always want.
I think it's the modern storytelling of, today.
Yeah,
And I think you kind of hit on this earlier, and I agreed totally. It's like sometimes, especially if you're really tired, it can take really, really long time to finish a book. Like I might start a book,
yeah.
but like finishing it is like I might I might be inching along. And with a movie, you
And we're
could,
slow readers too, so that even,
yeah, exactly, toss it on
makes
top
it
of it. But
makes
with
it
a
tougher.
movie,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of, I always have loved the short movies, like 2 hours, hour and a half, even better. If you can pull that off, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to fall asleep. That's great, you know?
Mhm.
But I think there's something about it where you can get an entire story in a very small amount of time versus, a show. There might be a lot of seasons and it becomes a
Yeah.
serious commitment, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
do I want to watch 8 seasons or 5 seasons or whatever of this show kind of thing? Um,
That's another thing, and because like one thing I would love to talk about more on the channel is TV shows, but usually if you have a TV show, it's like the complete thing is going to be 50 to 100 hours long, so it's
right.
it's a lot to think about, like
That's a
as
lot of
opposed to a
clips to
movie
go
where
through.
it's like yeah, and especially like if I do like a very specific breakdown of a movie, it's easy to just go, okay, hey, I haven't seen this movie in like a few years, I'll rewatch it,
Yeah.
and then 2 hours later, I have all the information I need. As
Yeah.
opposed to like, oh well, I need to rewatch Breaking Bad. There goes 50 hours
I
of my
was
life.
literally thinking of
Yeah,
Breaking Bad. You're like, what season was it? What
yeah,
episode? And yeah.
yeah. Like, and I haven't seen Breaking Bad since like probably about a decade ago. So like when I
Oh
do talk
wow.
about it in videos, I have to go based on like those memorable moments that I'm pretty sharp on. Like
Right.
just this past week, I did a video on bad versus good villains. And I was thinking about talking about Gus Fring from Breaking Bad, but
Ooh.
it's like, do I really remember that clearly
You only
enough to
remember
analyze it?
parts of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's tough to, and I don't have enough time to really, go through the entire series again to get all my ducks in a row.
Totally fair. Totally fair. No judgment at all. I get that.
But
Um, so with your most recent book, Story Made Simple, I know you like, let's do a quick rundown over the different parts because I know we've kind of mentioned a few already here.
yeah,
You
got it
said
right here. Yeah,
I
even though it's a little
hold it up
blurred.
closer.
There
Yeah,
we
it was
go.
there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Great cover, great title. I need to get my physical copies so I can
Thank
carry it
you.
around like that too. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a millisecond. What was the breaking point for you finishing that first novel? And is a lot of that actually in that book?
In finishing bad parts. So when I wrote Story Made Simple, I didn't want it to become one of those writing guides where the writer is just talking about his personal journey and it just goes on and on about that. I wanted to stick like almost exclusively to the advice. And I think I mentioned bad parts maybe twice in the whole book. I think at the beginning of the structure chapter, I mentioned that when I was trying to write novels, I really didn't know where to take them and everything. Then I learned how plot structure works, and that enabled me to write my first book, Bad Parts. But that was like the extent of how much I talked about bad parts because I didn't want it to become this book about like, oh well, let me tell you about my stories and everything I've written. And it's like, no, I mean, the reality, no, I mean, I know that the reality is, most people are looking for writing advice. They're not going to care about what I've written. They're going to care about what I have to say about the craft and how they can learn more. So with Story Made Simple, it was this no fluff, no nonsense book. That was the goal from the start. I wanted to keep that in line with my videos, which have always been, straight to the point.
Right,
I don't
right,
go
right.
off on these big time tangents or anything like that. We're gonna set things up. Here's what we're gonna talk about today. Here's how this aspect of storytelling works. Here are the examples.
Mhm.
Now you can go and move about your day and take care of whatever you
Yeah.
need to as far as your own writing goes. And with the book, I wanted to keep that same kind of energy to it. So, I kept the chapters short, right to the point, and I'm sure there are some people who are like, oh man, I wish he would have talked about his own writing process, for how bad parts came about, or how he wrote Entry Wounds or the Half Murders or whatever it was. But for me, I was always strictly focused on the actual craft.
Let me rephrase it. I didn't ask that wonderfully. My
Oh
apologies.
no, I mean,
um, what
I had
what
fun
was your
answering it.
what was your breakthrough moment? Because I know so many writers, myself included,
Okay,
finishing bad parts.
yeah.
And like obviously you mentioned it within your Story Made Simple, but what was your like, and this is how I actually finished this novel? Because I feel
Okay,
so
so
many people get stuck. I'm sorry. I did not
no,
want to
no,
interrupt you.
no, that's totally valid. So the interesting thing about Bad Parts was prior to starting the actual writing of Bad Parts, I had written um, a novel the year before that was
Okay.
basically like I think I was watching the movie Poltergeist. The Spielberg
Okay.
one came out in
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
early '80s, and there's a
Yep.
scene toward the end where the house, in the backyard, there's this house that's been supernaturally haunted or something like that, and
Yep.
in the backyard it starts crumbling, like there's this earthquake like thing, and something emerged out of the backyard that to me it looked like a disembodied fist.
Mhm.
And the very next day, I wrote like this little flash fiction thing about a disembodied fist, like chasing people around. And
Wow.
yeah, and next thing you know, it turned into like a 300-page novel over the course of a month
Wow.
or two. Yeah, and it
Talk
was a
about
terrible
legs.
novel. It was absolute garbage, but I wrote it from start to finish because I wanted to see what would happen with it. And I
That's
always liked like the
incredible.
concept of like I was working with like there was like this godlike creature that had lost all its parts and everything like that. And like the fist was one of them, and it was trying to piece itself back together. And that novel was terrible, but like it in the back of my mind, it just kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And I had been working on this dystopian story that was like something that I was obsessed with in my mid 20s,
Uh-huh.
and it never really clicked the way I was hoping for. And I remember I submitted it to. Um, there was a workshop that a bunch of my writer friends had gotten into, and I submitted to it, and I submitted the dystopian novel, the first 10,000 words or however many it was,
Uh-huh.
and I was anticipating that I would definitely get into this workshop, and then
Been there,
and
my
then
friend.
then I get an email saying you've been waitlisted. I'm like, what?
What are you doing? Come on.
Waitlisted? But all my friends went to this thing. We're
Right.
we're all on the same level. How can I be
Come on.
waitlisted? And yeah, and then that was like a real eye opener of a moment for me, where it was like a reality check that like things weren't working, and I needed to take a step back. And what I did at that point was I started to be honest with myself, and I said to myself, okay, well, this dystopian novel, it's a great idea, but I'm not passionate about it. And then
That makes
after
sense.
I backed away from it for maybe like a week, I started to say to myself, you know what? What if I took that crazy disembodied fist idea, and what if I, instead of doing a fantasy novel, what if I just put it into like a small town horror scenario? All of
Hmm.
a sudden, then it gets interesting because then you have a more grounded story.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Bad Parts comes together. I think I wrote it over the course of 2, 3 months, finished the first draft, and then toward the end of that period, I was really feeling that story because that first draft was where things started to click. That first draft was where, you know, earlier in this interview, we talked about how, sometimes you take risks and then you just got to clean them up and make sure that they
Right.
add up so that
Right.
the audience can follow it. But toward the end of, writing the first draft, I realized like I have some really good ideas here. I just have to find a way to smooth them over and connect them logically within the story for that to work. And then I wrote a second draft, and that one I started sending bits and pieces to a good friend of mine, and he was just like, he was a big help. Like every Sunday, I would send him a few chapters, and I'd go over his
Nice.
house. We'd talk about him. He
That's
would tell
great.
me what was working for him, what wasn't.
Yep.
And then toward the summer of the following year, I had written and completed a third draft, and I submitted it to this contest called Pitch Wars, which I don't know if you've heard of it
I've heard
or
of
if
it. Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, so Pitch Wars was great. Back in like the mid 2010s, it
Hmm.
was like if you were a new author and you wanted to, you know, publish your novel, you wanted to be in Pitch Wars because that was
That's
a
cool.
great opportunity to. You got to work with a mentor for 2 months, and then after that period was over, you also got to have your book on display for agents in this like agent round scenario. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of great opportunities there. And when I got into Pitch Wars, that was like a big confidence boost for me. That was like when I realized like
Absolutely.
yeah, because it's like
That's
you have
great.
this mentor who's willing to sacrifice 2 months of her life to help me improve the book, and
Yeah.
that says a lot. So
Yeah.
for me, that was the big moment where it's like, okay, what I'm doing, I'm doing something right. I just need to do it better. And I think that was what ultimately gave me the confidence to get through the
I
rest of the
love that.
process.
Love your honesty, Brandon, because I think most writers can relate to, hey, I've got this thing. Maybe it's finished, maybe it's not. It doesn't even matter, truthfully. The point is, you have at least part of a story or even a whole story, and you know something's not working,
A
but you
lot was
don't,
not working.
right? But you know there's something there, but you're like, something's got to change, you know. And this is like, I think some new writers wanted to be like, scrap that whole thing, toss it. I kind of am of the philosophy, you're never really scrapping anything, you're always just, you know,
Filing it away.
yeah, using it in different ways,
Mhm.
down the road. Yeah, filing it away is a nice way to put
Mhm.
it. Like we're that organized, right?
Yeah.
um but you kind of had that peanut butter and jelly approach, frankly, where you had this, like, part of this idea here and then this other idea here, and you're just kind of like, and now
There's your
it's
sandwich. Yeah.
suddenly working that much better. And I think there's also the idea of practice novels where
Mm,
you don't have to publish everything you write. I mean, I think that's kind of a myth that maybe newer writers might latch onto. You know, like, it's up there with having a cabin and a pipe and a sweater and like
sure.
typing on a typewriter and never getting writer's block. That's all. It's just, this is not reality. The truth is, most people are going to write a few novels, and you might get so stuck on that novel that you're just like, I'm going to set it aside here for a bit and I'm going to focus my attention on something else, you know?
It's interesting. With all three of my novels that I've published, um, I wrote them first of all as like a sloppy little practice run. Let's see how this goes, kind of thing. And then
Wow.
I came back to them a year later, at least a year later, and then that was when I actually wrote the true story. Because I already told you what happened with Bad Parts, and then with Entry Wounds, there was a situation where I had, I think in 2018, I wrote like an early draft of it, and it was just the idea was cool, but the characters didn't fit it. And then like the following year, I had been playing a video game called Yakuza Zero, which is about like the Japanese mob and things like
Mhm.
that. And
Cool.
I was just like really fascinated with like the Yakuza. And I was like, oh, what if I take that haunted gun idea and I combine it with the Yakuza? And then all of a sudden
So good.
that was what lit the spark. And
That's awesome.
yeah, it's the inspiration comes from the craziest places. But there was also with the Half Murders, I wrote it. I think I wrote it first in 2021, and
Okay.
it was just like, again, let's just test out this idea, see where it goes, and then it goes in a terrible direction, and it sucks, but that's okay. And I came back. Yeah, I came back to it a year later, where it was like, I think if I, you know add a couple things in here, I can make this work. And all of a sudden, I turn it into more of a mystery, while still keeping it like a horror thriller and everything like
Right.
that. And, just blending the different ideas brought it to life the second time around.
That's so fun. That is so fun. It's nice that you had the space as well to kind of come back,
Hmm.
and that's, you're able to be creative and also really teach essentially by doing the YouTube stuff, and then working on the novels as well. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds
Yeah.
there. Keeps your skills sharp and keeps your feet in the pool, so to speak, where
Yeah,
you're kind of
absolutely.
always thinking story.
The interesting thing about YouTube was when I started doing YouTube, I was not getting very many views at all. Like if my newest video got like 50 views in a week, that was like, whoa, 50,
You're
But
like, I went viral for 50,
it
right?
was
You're
like,
like,
wow, yeah, a few dozen
yeah.
people watched it. This is big, But there was a certain point where I was, you know, just stopped caring about the views, and I started thinking about the videos as a way of me essentially writing like log books, if you will, for things that I was learning from different books on the
Ooh, that's
craft that I was
good.
reading at the time. Yeah, because there were like certain things, like I'd read something in a book, like whether it was Robert McKee or
Mhm.
Donald Moss or whoever, and I'd be like,
Sure.
oh, that's a really great thing. Like I want to remember that. So then what I would
Make a
do, I
video
would
about it.
make a
That's
video
great.
out of it, because then
Yeah.
you really, when you make a video, like whenever you teach something, you really have to learn it, because you're have to spread that learning. So
Yeah.
but it would challenge me to really, internalize it. And then I would always have like this thing that I could refer back to. Like sometimes I'll watch like my older videos because it's like, oh, what was that one thing I learned from Truby, or that thing I learned
Yeah.
from McKee, or whoever it was. And then it's like, okay, well, I just go back to there and I have it, and boom.
What an awesome, helpful way to build up your craft in a like that's really cool. I like that because it's like,
It,
and you're inviting others to join you on this journey too, as you keep writing, as you put out more books, and that's really cool. I love that. That is so cool.
Yeah, because I think the thing is whenever I read a book on the craft of writing, I usually will have like a little sticky notepad with me, and like if I find something I really like, I'll write down like, okay, here's something here, and then I'll stick it to that particular page.
Yep.
But I never actually go back to them. Like I just like I don't know. I just never. It's a total waste of time, but I do it anyway. And then, but with YouTube, like you know it's always available. I can always access it wherever I am. So if I do forget something, or I want to refresh my memory on something, I just go back to one of my older videos, and it's like, okay, well, here's what I learned from that particular book.
That's really cool. Any more recent stories that have been captivating for you? Um, books, movies, shows, whatever. Anything more recently you're just like, wow, I'm really into this.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think here because it's been kind of a rough year for movies. It feels like every time I go to the theater, I'm disappointed. But
I feel you.
yeah, it's been pretty rough. And part of it is I just haven't gotten to the movies enough. I haven't been to the movies in like 2 months because I've just been busy, especially like just released Story Made Simple and everything like that.
Sure.
You know what I liked a lot? It was funny because a buddy of mine, he just showed me the intro of it, and he's like, "Yo, you got to see this." And he's like, yeah, "At least watch the intro." But it was the TV series Peacemaker, which it's based on the DC anti-hero.
Yeah.
He was in like the Suicide Squad and everything like that. And
Yep.
I am typically not a big fan of like comedy type stories, and it's like a dramedy situation, like like there are stakes, there are like world altering stakes and everything, but it's portrayed in like a humorous way. And I met him at a conference in Pittsburgh. Like we've known each other forever, but I got to hang out with him a little while, and then he lives out that way, so we went over his house after the conference, and we start watching Peacemaker. He shows me one episode, and then we just bitched the rest of the thing. We had such a good time with it.
Like,
And
this is good. Go.
yeah, it was just
That's awesome.
it was just like a fun, stupid story that you could enjoy with a friend, and laugh about some things.
Yeah.
And the characters were a blast.
Nice.
I haven't watched season 2. They just released the first few episodes. I haven't seen it yet.
Yes, more recently, right?
Yeah, season 1 was fantastic, and I had so much fun with it, and it was just
That's
like such a
great.
great like breath of fresh air for me. Because again, like I usually watch or read like pretty hyper serious stuff.
Yeah, makes
yeah.
sense.
In terms of things that I've read recently, I read a really nasty horror story called Toxic Love by Christopher Triana, and it was just
gosh.
like he's an extreme guy, like in terms of like the content of his stories. He really pushes the envelope, and just like I'll be reading and I'll be like, I can't believe he went there with that, and like this one, like the first 10 pages, like the main character, he's working as like a cleanup guy at like murder scenes and everything.
I see
like
where this is going very quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, toxic love, and then this girl starts working with him, and she's obsessed with death, and next thing you know, they're hooking up at the crime scene and everything.
Oh
like
my
that.
gosh,
that's like the first like 20 pages, and then it just gets
gotta
worse
have
and
that
worse
hook in
from
there, man. Gotta have that hook in there.
But I think like I've read so much horror through the years that like when I read something that really pushes the envelope like that, it really like I can have a lot of fun with it. Right. Another great book I read recently, Old Scratch is what it's called. Old Scratch by Christopher Ruffty. And it was kind of like Pet Cemetery, the road trip.
Nice.
Basically, it starts off with this woman. She's in like her 20s, and like her baby has just died, and she knows about this town where she can take the kid to be resurrected and everything like that. And
Oh
it was
my
a really,
gosh, that's a
yeah, it was a,
cool
yeah, it was such a cool concept,
mix.
and like the way it was written was just like really gripping, and I was hooked. Like when I started reading it, it was on Kindle Unlimited, and I just gave it a shot, and I'm like,
Right.
I'll give it a chapter or two, and I'm like, oh wow, I got to finish this. This is just too good.
That's
So
so cool.
yeah.
Uh, I absolutely have to have you connect with my friend who writes a lot of horror local here with me and was super influenced by Goosebumps. So I'm gonna
Oh
I'll do
yeah,
that later. But yeah, the more I'm piecing it all together, I'm like, you are such a horror guy. I'm
yeah, yeah.
surprised you're not like leaning even more into that genre to an extent. I mean, you are, but I feel like it's like, I feel like you could really have more horror, I guess, within reason on your channel,
So
especially
what
with Halloween
really,
coming.
yeah, what breaks my heart though, anytime I do a horror video, it
Yeah,
always bombs, just completely bombs.
that's
And the
why.
reason why, like the majority of my audience came from like those bad versus good dialogue videos that I did. And
Context
like,
matters.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they had like, Anakin Skywalker and Tyrion Lannister on the thumbnail. So it
You
was like,
set it up to this is the standard, this is what I do.
yeah.
And then,
Well, I didn't even set it up that way. I mean, that was just the way it played out, but like
yeah,
that was the video that ended up taking off.
yeah,
And what happened was the audience that I got was an audience that was interested in Star Wars and Game of Thrones and things like that. They weren't interested
mainstream.
in horror. And like,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just happy to have an audience. So I mean, like,
that's
it's
right.
just,
You
well,
said it, man.
it's funny though, because right before my channel took off in like the middle of 2023, I had considered quitting YouTube. And this was like, yeah, this was like April of 2023. There was one week I did a video, and it was a video on the elements of thriller stories. And I had went through with the video, I recorded it, and then when I went to edit it, I think on that following Monday, um, there was like this electrical noise throughout the video, and I was like, I must have spent like 2 days trying to remove the
Oh, you
electrical
could have.
noise before I just realized that, like, oh wow, I'm just gonna have to redo the video. And at this point, like, my videos were like, if I got like, and this was like, I think I was 4 years deep into YouTube at that point, and my weekly videos might get like 1,000 views, if
Hmm.
that. And like, I was like sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, do I really want to keep making these videos? I mean, like, especially like all this hassle with the electrical issues and
Right.
stupid things like this happening. And, I was very strongly considering quitting. And I think that was the only week in like the past 5 years I didn't release a video. And then the week after that was, I just said to myself, you know what? I already have like the basic script for that thriller elements video. I might as well just do it, put it back up there. And I released that one. And then I think 2 weeks later was when my bad versus good dialogue videos just exploded out of nowhere. And it was just crazy. And it was just, there was no reason for them to explode. I think there was like, it was May the 4th, for Star Wars Day. And I think,
Maybe it was
you
a little
know,
Star Wars love
I think
there.
like, yeah, having, yeah, Anakin's picture in the thumbnail helped, but it was just like, it wasn't like my channel had been like growing and growing, like it was just like cold silence, and then all of a sudden it just explodes because of
That's
some video I did two
inspiring for
years earlier.
everyone because most
Yeah.
people are truly in that boat of I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it. And
Mhm.
I think it obviously you're so great, you're so full of humility and grateful and glad to be, where you are and glad to have an
I
audience.
got
And
lucky. It was just,
yeah,
the,
it's
the algorithm just favored me one day. It was just that simple.
I love it. Any parting words that you'd like to share with other writers?
Yeah, just if you are a writer and you want to write something great, you gotta be consistent with it. You can't be one of those people who just writes when you feel like it. You gotta find like a specific time of day or several times a week, and
Yeah.
devote some time to the craft, and learn about the craft, but also practice the craft. And I think if you put in the effort and you put in the time, and you push through those harder moments, those moments of doubt, like what I just talked about, like with my channel, where it was like, oh well, hey, there's this electrical issue, I can't put a video out, maybe I should quit. No, I keep doing it, and then next thing you know, what's waiting right around the corner is success. So if you're persistent, eventually luck will come.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And for folks that are more interested in you, I will put links to your website, to your channel, and to your books. So and your website's probably the best way to get a hold of you too, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's a contact page and you can find an email address there if you want to contact me. But thanks
Awesome.
for having me, Jim.
You bet. Thank you so much. I hope